The story starts at the Demon King's castle, a massive place now choked by vines and branches winding through every hall. Four heroes stand in the audience chamber, having fought through hell to get here. They announce themselves to the Demon King, who just sits on his throne looking amused. He actually seems surprised that his four generals fell to this specific group, admitting they did better than he expected from mere mortals. A fifth figure steps out from behind the group, and the Demon King immediately senses a ton of magical power coming off him. He remarks that this guy must be some serious backup. This is Keith Alderberg, our main character. Keith watches the Demon King closely, his mind confirming the worst. This really is the legendary ruler of darkness, a tactical genius who's way smarter than the other generals. One of the heroes snaps at this, arguing that strategy is trash compared to raw power. He points his sword at the throne, dead set on winning. The Demon King just casually raises his hand and fires off a magical blast. The explosion is huge. Furniture, debris, and the heroes themselves get tossed back by the pressure. Everyone is visible shaken by how much power he has. One hero manages to thank Mari, who jumped forward at the last second to shield them. Mari nods but admits she can't keep blocking hits like that forever. Keith watches the fallout, realizing that the massive blast was just a pulse, not even a real attack. The Demon King hasn't even started trying yet. Another girl in the party points out they're running out of time. The Demon King keeps spamming destructive energy without even breaking a sweat. Gelm loses his patience and charges in, planning to end it in one hit. He yells for Zot and Meralda to cover him, and they both shout back that they're on it. Keith watches Gelm with a bad feeling. The guy is just rushing in without a plan or any info. They haven't found a single weakness yet, making this a total suicide mission. Mari yells for Gelm to wait, but he won't listen. Keith tries to think fast, knowing that charging blindly is just going to get everyone killed. The Demon King fires again as the whole group lunges forward. Gelm yells that they can't just sit around waiting for Keith to come up with a perfect plan while they're being blasted. To them, the risk is worth it. Keith's brain is working overtime. The Demon King mocks them, calling them idiots for attacking head-on with zero subtlety. Keith forces himself to focus, searching for a gap in the armor. Finally, he spots it, a glowing magical stone right in the middle of the Demon King's chest. That's the weak spot. Gelm lands a massive strike, but it does absolutely nothing. The Demon King calls the move slow and hits back with a counterattack that leaves Gelm wrecked and stunned on the floor. In that split second, Keith uses his thief skill, Swift Steal. He moves like a blur, way faster than anyone else, and snatches the stone right out of the king's chest. The Demon King just stands there, totally confused. Since the protective stone is gone, Gelm's delayed attack finally hits home, dealing a lethal blow. The dying king mutters about their tactics, saying even if he dies, another Demon King will just take his place. Gelm acts tough, saying he'll just kill the next one too. Keith thinks that logic is pretty shaky, but keeps his mouth shut. As the king turns to ash, Keith figures the fight was actually easier than he thought since his plan worked out perfectly. Zot turns to Keith and demands to know what he was doing the whole time. Keith just says he stepped on something and shows them the stone. Gelm grabs it out of his hand, looking disgusted. He calls Keith a dirty thief and says it's pathetic that he was stealing while everyone else was fighting for their lives. The rest of the group smirks, totally agreeing. Gelm says a treasure like this is wasted on someone like Keith. They all just walk out of the room, completely ignoring the fact that Keith saved them. Keith stands there alone, clenching his fist. He's fuming because no one respects the strategy that actually won the war. Mari comes over to try and cheer him up, saying one day they'll realize how much he does. She's the only one being kind. Suddenly, Zot yells from down the hall, asking why they're wasting time chatting. Mari apologizes and runs to catch up, while Zot grumbles about the thieving bastard under his breath. Keith thanks Mari, but he knows deep down that the others will never change. As long as she's on his side, he tries to tell himself it's enough. Mari looks sad for him and gives him a quick hug before they move on. Later, Meralda complains about being tired and wanting to go home. Gelm tells her they have to loot the castle first, and she agrees that's a good point. Keith goes along with it, and they start searching the place for loot. After the search, Gelm is annoyed that there wasn't more treasure. Keith ends up being the pack mule, struggling under the weight of all the bags. He asks why he's the only one carrying everything, and Zot tells him flat out. Since he didn't land the final blow, the least he can do is carry the luggage. Mari asks him worriedly if he's doing okay with all that weight. Eventually, they reach the town of Elim, where people immediately notice the returning heroes. Citizens gather excitedly as the party announces the Demon King's defeat. People react with amazement, cheering and asking for confirmation that they really pulled off such a feat. The entire town celebrates their victory with genuine appreciation. Later, the group gathers to divide the loot from the castle. They spread the treasures out, evaluating each item to determine a fair split. Everyone eyes the collection with varying levels of interest and greed. Gelm takes charge of the distribution. He hands a huge, heavy bag of valuables to Meralda, then gives similarly big bags to Zot and Mari. Both thank him for the generous shares. Finally, he hands Keith a tiny bag with almost nothing in it and dismisses him with a casual thanks. Mari objects immediately, calling the split blatantly unfair. Meralda responds coldly, saying the reward should match the work done. She adds that if Mari feels so sorry for Keith, she should just share her own loot with him. Mari gets visibly angry at the callous remark. She pulls a robe from her own share and gives it to Keith, insisting he deserves it. Keith initially refuses, knowing the Demon King's cloak is her best item. Mary pleads with him to take it, emphasizing that he deserves far more recognition than a small trinket. Keith finally accepts with genuine gratitude, promising he'll never forget her kindness. That night, the group hits a bar to celebrate. They cheer and drink while Mary laughs along with the party. Off to the side, Keith stands alone and isolated. Mary notices him and watches with concern, but Keith simply slips away from the gathering without drawing attention. He sits alone in his room afterward, gripping his bedsheet as anger boils inside him. He reflects bitterly that this was the worst journey imaginable. Still, it's almost over. Once they return to the kingdom, he'll finally be done with these people who treated him with such contempt. A memory of his meeting with the king surfaces. Before the journey, Keith had set one condition. If he defeated the Demon King, the Aldeburgh Thieves Guild must be granted complete immunity. The king's subordinate had shouted in outrage, calling Keith a fool and warning that the High Council would be furious. He insisted the demand was ridiculous. The king had intervened, telling his general to calm down. He explained his reasoning clearly. The Demon King was a much bigger threat than any band of thieves. He promised that if Keith returned successful, he would personally release the guild from all legal consequences. Keith asked for confirmation, and the king gave his word without hesitation. Back in the present, Keith feels the weight of the journey. Throughout the mission, his companions stripped away his dignity. They threw food at him like an animal, berated him for being a thief, and treated him like trash. They even used him as bait in dangerous spots to keep themselves safe. Lying in the dark, Keith feels crushed by the exhaustion and despair. He just wants to stop thinking. He's completely done with everything. Elsewhere in the inn, the rest of the party is enjoying themselves. Someone mentions how great the food is, noting they haven't eaten this well in a long time. Gelm agrees enthusiastically. Zot suddenly asks where Mari went, but Gelm tells him to stop obsessing over her, pointing out there are plenty of other women in the world. Zot counters that if Meralda belongs to Gelm, then Mari is naturally his. Gelm dismisses this, insisting no woman matches Meralda's perfection, while showing her obvious affection. She smiles, saying he gets even more charming when he's drunk. Suddenly, a hooded figure arrives and addresses them formally by name. Zot asks if they look like commoners who could be mistaken for anyone else. The stranger removes his hood, revealing he's a messenger sent directly from the king with a letter for them. He clarifies his only specific order. The thief Keith must not be allowed to open this letter under any circumstances. Gelm finds this intriguing and opens it immediately. His expression shifts to shock as he reads. Zot demands to know what it says, and Gelm hands it over. Zot scans the contents and remarks that things just got very interesting. Meanwhile, Keith is trying to rest when his eyes snap open. He senses something wrong. Gelm and the others move silently toward his room to carry out the king's orders. Gelm calls out softly, asking if Keith is awake. Keith says yes, noting he's been wondering if they needed something. He mentions that Gelm looks like he's had a lot to drink. Gelm apologizes for waking him, but Keith senses a shift in the atmosphere. The malice is too strong for simple bullying. A dark aura of genuine killing intent comes from Gelm. Keith is confused until Meralda's voice calls out from the hallway. He demands to know what's going on, realizing he's trapped. Gelm draws his sword and explains plainly. The king finds it inconvenient to have a thief in the hero's party. Understanding hits Keith like a physical blow. The king betrayed him. If Keith dies here, the contract is void, meaning the king never intended to free the guild. The whole promise was a lie. Gelm steps forward, announcing Keith's expulsion from the party. He says the order is simple. Kill one filthy thief. He charges with his sword raised. Keith dodges with quick reflexes, grabs his bag, and hurls it at Zot's face, using the distraction to bolt for the exit. Zot raises his sword, shouting that Keith isn't going down quietly, which just makes things more annoying. Keith's mind races. The doorway is his only way out. He's about to bolt, but Meralda beats him to it, firing a magical blast that rips through the room and sets everything on fire. Keith curses. He didn't think she'd shoot without worrying about hitting her own teammates. Gellum lunges from another angle while Keith tries to handle all the threats at once. He knows he needs to get his footing back to defend himself. Gellum jumps for an overhead strike while Zot suddenly appears right in front of Keith, cutting off his escape. Zot mocks him, calling him a little rat and telling him there's no way out. The room is a total inferno from Meralda's magic. Zot grumbles that it was a close call, telling Meralda not to go overboard since she almost blasted him too. She offers a quick apology, but Zot just notes that she always plays rough, and both she and Gellum seem to be having a blast with this hunt. He figures everything worked out fine anyway, which is how Gellum usually likes to fight. Keith taps into his skills again and sprints out of the burning room at full speed. Gellum yells for Meralda to watch out, but she's already on it. She fires another attack at Keith's back, and the blast sends him flying out of the building and into the town streets. People start noticing the chaos, but Keith doesn't stop. He runs through the streets with desperate speed. Zot asks if the guy actually got away. Gellum shrugs it off, saying after a hit like that, Keith will probably just drop dead in a gutter somewhere. They figure the problem is solved and don't bother chasing him. Keith keeps running for his life, his body screaming in pain from several deep wounds. He finally makes it to the town center and collapses, unable to move another inch. His thoughts turn dark. He wonders if this is where it all ends. He thinks about his guild and the people counting on him. He's come so far just to fail at the finish line. Frustration and despair wash over him as he lies bleeding on the cold ground. Suddenly, a voice calls his name. It's Mari. She finds him and reacts with total horror at his injuries. She demands to know who did this while immediately using her healing magic to keep him from dying. Keith thanks her weakly. As she helps him sit up, she says she's going to get Gellum and the others to help. Keith stops her instantly, telling her absolutely not. Mari is confused, but Keith explains the stakes. She can't tell anyone she found him or healed him. He begs her not to ask why, but warns her that if the others find out she helped, they'll kill her to keep her quiet. He tells her to go back to the inn and act like nothing happened. He promises that with the healing she already gave him, he'll be able to move again after some rest. Mari cries out that it can't be true. She insists they go back together, thinking she can heal him fully and that things will work out even if the others are mad. Keith snaps her name, ordering her to go back alone. He tells her she has to agree with whatever the others say, no matter what the lie is. Crying, Mari finally gives in. She agrees to leave, but asks for one last thing. She covers him with the Demon King's cloak she gave him earlier, noticing how cold he's getting from the blood loss. Keith tries to refuse, but she insists, telling him to take care of himself. Keith thanks her one last time, knowing she was his only real friend on the journey. Mari walks away, sobbing as she goes. As she disappears, Keith's vision starts to swim. Everything goes dizzy from the blood loss. Then a voice speaks to him, calling him a noble youth. Keith freezes in shock. In front of him, the Demon King manifests, looking very much alive despite being turned to ash. Keith just stares, unable to wrap his brain around how this is even possible. Keith's mind reels with disbelief at the impossibility manifesting before his eyes. The Demon King should be completely dead. He and his former companions defeated this entity thoroughly. Calling those people companions feels wrong now since they mean absolutely nothing to him anymore after their betrayal. The Demon King stands before him despite death, blood streaming from his mouth in clear evidence of fatal damage. He proclaims that Demon Kings never truly die regardless of how thoroughly they get destroyed. Keith points out the obvious contradiction. Blood currently runs from the Demon King's mouth in quantities that suggest mortal injury. He processes internally how much damage this entity must have sustained, recognizing that this situation presents a perfect opportunity to escape while the Demon King remains weakened. The Demon King continues speaking as though physical damage carries no real significance. He explains that his existence stretches back to immemorial times, with Demon King power flowing through his blood in an endless cycle completely unknown to those outside this cursed lineage. The power functions like a curse, an unending karmic punishment that transcends individual mortality. The Demon King addresses Keith as the Nameless One, observing how Keith has spent his entire existence running from various threats. He fled the night while chasing after his band of thieves, sought refuge with the Adventurers Guild when isolation threatened to consume him, and now runs from heroes actively attempting to claim his life. Keith responds defensively, noting that running simply defines how thieves survive in a hostile world. Besides, he possesses a name, Keith, which carries meaning and identity beyond whatever label the Demon King attempts to impose. The Demon King questions whether Keith can truly still identify himself by that name, given what comes next. Demon Kings cannot die in any permanent sense. He raises his bloodied hand dramatically while explaining that they transform into power that passes to the next vessel in an unbreakable chain. No escape exists from this cycle. Dark aura explodes outward from the Demon King's position, consuming Keith completely within its malevolent energy. The darkness swallows everything, and Keith's consciousness abandons him entirely. Time passes in unknown quantity before Keith wakes from unconsciousness. Confusion overwhelms him immediately as he struggles to understand his surroundings. Enormous containers fill the space around him, and inside these vessels float human bodies suspended in some kind of preservative fluid. Keith demands aloud how he ended up in this location. Throughout his entire life, he endured suffering and mistreatment consistently. This outcome represents what all that endurance has earned him: nothing but more misery and near-death experiences. He questions what purpose any of it served when the fundamental goal of saving his family remains completely beyond his grasp. He buried his pride deep in the dirt, swallowed humiliation after humiliation, and accepted treatment no person should tolerate, all to end up half dead and abandoned. His thoughts turn bitter and accusatory toward forces beyond mortal understanding. He questions whether being born into nobility constitutes such a grave sin that it warrants this level of punishment. If gods or devils truly exist somewhere in this world, he demands they answer him now. His shout echoes through the chamber without response. Footsteps approach from somewhere in the darkness. Someone arrives carrying an ornate object, explaining that this item represents the Mirror of Discernment. This magical artifact possesses the ability to reveal the job classification and status of anyone reflected in its surface. Keith watches nervously as the stranger angles the mirror toward him. His confusion deepens exponentially when a system window materializes in front of his vision, displaying information he cannot immediately process. The window identifies him as a phantom thief, a job classification with abilities extending to stealing absolutely anything, regardless of conventional limitations or protections. Keith's mind struggles with this revelation. The narrator's voice explains that Phantom Thief represents the highest possible rank achievable within the thief job category, though Keith himself has never encountered one in person before this moment. Only an extremely small number of people throughout all of history ever reach the highest rank of any given job classification. Nobody within the Aldeburgh Thieves Guild has ever witnessed a phantom thief operating at full capacity. A memory surfaces from Keith's past. One of the senior thieves once observed Keith's natural talent and predicted great things for his future. The prediction suggested Keith might even achieve phantom thief status once he matured fully. If that transformation occurred, he would naturally become the new boss leading their entire organization. The memory fades as Keith returns his attention to the present crisis. He continues reading the system window, which now displays additional information that makes even less sense than the Phantom Thief classification. The text identifies him as Demon King, describing this role as the world's sole embodiment of destruction and mayhem. The Demon King exists as an entity that rules over followers of darkness and leads the entire world toward chaos through calculated influence and overwhelming power. Keith's thoughts reject this information immediately. The idea that he could possibly be the Demon King strikes him as completely impossible. However, the mirror never lies according to established magical laws. Additional evidence supports the impossible claim. Horns have sprouted from his head, physical proof that cannot be dismissed or explained away through alternative reasoning. The reality of his transformation becomes undeniable despite his desperate desire to reject it. Loneliness defines the Demon King's existence as the only one of his kind at any given time. If Keith has truly inherited the position of king, then logic suggests he commands subordinates somewhere within this structure. He calls out tentatively, requesting that any henchmen present reveal themselves immediately. 4 figures emerge from the containers that previously held only floating bodies. They step forward, dripping with preservation fluid but otherwise appearing fully functional and alert. Keith's internal monologue turns panicky. He has no understanding of what actions led to this outcome, but the situation has clearly spiraled beyond his control. Whether he functions as Demon King or Phantom Thief becomes irrelevant when these 4 subordinates represent the previous Demon King's heavenly generals. They possess power far exceeding anything Keith can currently muster. If fighting becomes necessary, they will eliminate him effortlessly before he manages even basic defensive measures. His only path to survival involves avoiding combat entirely through careful social navigation. The four introduce themselves formally with military precision. The summoner identifies herself as Diana. The sabreur gives his name as Jinru. The gunslinger announces himself as Victor. The dark mage completes the introductions as Alira Quariata. They kneel in perfect synchronization and pledge themselves to serve Keith's reign. Keith thanks them awkwardly while thinking desperately that these must be his inherited henchmen. He instructs them to raise their heads from their submissive positions. Diana looks at him carefully, her expression shifting to recognition. She addresses him with surprise, noting his identity as Keith before correcting herself to use the proper title of Majesty. Keith admits he cannot deny the identification, acknowledging her reasonable surprise at this development. He was indeed a member of the hero party that defeated the previous Demon King. If she wants revenge for that act, he requests she go easy on him, given his vulnerable current state. Diana responds with firm reassurance. Those glorious horns protruding from his head, combined with the mantle wrapped around his form, can only signify one truth. He represents their next leader, their new Demon King. The physical evidence overrides any concerns about his past affiliations. Keith questions whether she truly holds no resentment about him killing the previous Demon King she served. Diana admits honestly that claiming complete indifference would be a lie. However, seeking revenge against the new Demon King would represent terrible disrespect to the position itself, regardless of personal feelings. Keith thinks with relief that this response suggests he might actually survive this encounter. Jinru interrupts with a concern that has been troubling him. He requests permission to ask about something that bothers him deeply. He questions why their new majesty has not dissolved them yet according to standard protocol. Keith reacts with confusion, asking what dissolution even means in this context. Alira explains that losing to the heroes indicates they functioned as failures in their assigned roles. Victor adds that dissolution, the process of transforming defeated subordinates into clusters of raw magic, represents what past Demon Kings always implemented after defeat. Diana clarifies that normally the Demon King disposes of failed heavenly generals immediately and prepares an entirely new group to serve going forward. They cannot understand why they have been permitted to continue living. Keith's thoughts race frantically. He possesses absolutely no idea how to perform dissolution or any other Demon King abilities. He improvises quickly, explaining that he decided to grant them all one more opportunity to prove themselves. Surely they learned valuable lessons from the failures that led to their defeat. Such experience should not be wasted when it could inform better performance in future conflicts. Diana responds with genuine emotion, praising such kind and merciful words from their new leader. Jinro swears to devote his entire body and soul to returning this unexpected kindness. Victor seconds this pledge enthusiastically. The Dark Mage Alera thanks their majesty directly, admitting she fully expected to die today. Keith remains confused about what exactly is happening, but feels grateful that everyone seems to accept his authority without violent challenge. Diana requests that he issue his first official command as their Demon King. Keith's mind goes blank as panic sets in. Diana notices his hesitation and asks whether he feels unwell. Keith denies any illness, explaining that he simply feels a bit low on blood at the moment. Diana interprets this statement as the Demon King desiring bloodshed to replenish his power. Jinro clenches his fists in preparation for violence. Victor draws his gun from its holster. Alira questions whether they plan to attack a town like in the old times, wondering aloud how much blood they must spill to fulfill their majesty's desires properly. Keith frantically clarifies that he meant his own blood levels are physically low in his body, not that he desires consuming blood from external sources. Diana processes this correction and suggests that the best remedy for blood deficiency involves eating meat to restore iron levels and overall strength. Keith agrees with this much more reasonable interpretation, requesting a meal to address his physical weakness. The dining hall receives Keith shortly afterward, where a maid serves him food. He looks around the space with wonder, never realizing during his previous search that the Demon King's castle contained rooms like this elegant dining area. He addresses his four subordinates, confirming that the butlers and maids serving them are not actually human. Diana confirms his observation. These servants exist as golems she summoned specifically to maintain the castle and serve its inhabitants. Keith finishes eating and compliments Alira specifically, noting that the food tasted delicious. She responds with pleasure at hearing this praise. Keith shifts topics to address practical concerns that have been bothering him. He never encountered rooms like this dining hall when he searched the castle during the hero party's initial raid. Diana explains naturally that the majority of rooms within this castle cannot be entered without her ethereal eyes ability providing access. Normally, the Magic Castle key would grant entry to all chambers, but Keith clearly has not grown accustomed to that power yet. She took initiative by using her own ability to open necessary rooms for his convenience. She notices something alarming while looking at him more carefully. The magic crystal that should be embedded in his chest is completely missing. Keith confirms her observation. Gelm took the crystal. More precisely, Gelm claimed ownership of the crystal that Keith extracted from the previous Demon King during their final battle. Diana reacts with outrage at this information. Those despicable humans stole the Demon King's magic crystal for themselves. Keith questions whether the crystal holds significant importance beyond its obvious value. Diana explains with emphasis that the crystal is absolutely essential. Navigation through the chambers inside the Demon King's castle requires the crystal's power. Additionally, the crystal supplies approximately half of the total power the Demon King controls at any given time. Keith processes this revelation with growing dread. In other words, he currently operates at only half the strength the previous Demon King possessed. His thoughts turn dark as he considers implications. If his former party members attack him again in his current weakened state, he would stand absolutely no chance of survival or victory. Diana watches his worry manifest physically and offers reassurance. As someone who originally existed as human before transformation, Keith possesses enhancements from his Phantom Thief job classification that layer on top of his Demon King powers. His combined strength should rival that of the previous Demon King, or potentially even surpass it once he learns to utilize both power sources effectively. Keith processes what Diana just revealed. The Phantom Thief job classification grants him abilities to disguise himself as whatever form he desires, infiltrate any location regardless of security measures, and steal absolutely anything he sets his sights on. The power sounds almost too convenient to be real, yet the system confirms its existence within his skill set. Diana shifts the conversation toward practical matters. She suggests showing him around the armory since he retained his human job classification alongside his Demon King powers. Finding suitable equipment for his unique combination of abilities would be prudent before attempting any operations outside the castle. Keith feels somewhat confused about what this entails, but follows her lead. The armory reveals itself as a vast storage chamber where all equipment gets preserved in specialized containers. Diana begins, cataloging items aloud while examining their properties. She points out the bangle of obedience, immediately noting that this particular piece of equipment does not suit phantom thieves at all. The Heaven Split crown also fails to meet the requirements for his job classification. She invites him to browse freely and use anything that catches his interest, explaining that these items exist as properties belonging to the Demon King position itself. Keith admits honestly that even with permission to use these items, he possesses no understanding of what any of them actually do or how their functions operate. Diana responds with a helpful reminder. Phantom thieves possess an inherent skill known as appraising eye. This ability might solve his identification problem completely. Keith thinks back to what he understands about skill usage. Users simply need to recite the skill name mentally or verbally. As long as awareness exists that the skill has been acquired, invocation requires only minimal effort. He thinks of the word appraising eye while focusing on a nearby item. A system window materializes before his vision, displaying information about the Nightfall lamp. The quality rating appears alongside a detailed description. This equipment turns day into night within a localized area. The effect's duration depends entirely on the amount of magic power the user invests during activation. Keith questions whether Diana can also see this information displayed in front of him. Diana clarifies that the skill functions as limited exclusively to him. Nobody else can perceive the information windows his appraising eye generates. Keith acknowledges this explanation, recognizing how useful this private information access will prove during operations. He shifts his attention to another item sitting nearby, the Monocle of Certainty. His appraising eye activates automatically, revealing that this equipment views the stats, equipment details, and item information of any target within the user's field of vision. The amount of viewable information increases progressively with continued use in practice. Keith remembers the fundamental ability defining phantom thieves. They can steal anything they lay their eyes on. The monocle enhances this core ability by providing detailed information about potential targets before attempting theft. He declares this represents the only equipment he truly needs. Diana observes his choice with interest, noting that this particular item should prove very useful in assisting during battles. The tactical applications seem obvious. Keith emphasizes that the usefulness extends specifically to his personal needs. This monocle represents everything he requires for the operations he plans to conduct. He requests Diana's cooperation for testing something with the equipment. She agrees, and he activates the monocle while focusing on her. Information floods his vision. Summoner classification, secretary subclass, etherealizability, hypnosis capability, job knowledge specialization. The data appears comprehensive and detailed. Keith reaches forward and gently places his hand against Diana's cheek while examining the information display. Diana reacts with surprise, questioning what exactly he intends to test on her through this physical contact. She holds his hand against her face, but then immediately pulls back, requesting that he release her now. However, instead of creating distance, she moves closer to him and questions what he plans to test next. Her behavior seems contradictory and somewhat confusing. Keith requests that she summon a monster for him to observe how the monocle displays information about summoned creatures. Diana raises her hand dramatically and begins her incantation, calling forth her special creature. Nothing happens initially. Keith questions why the summoning failed to produce results. Diana insists that the creature will appear any second now if he just waits a little longer. Keith decides to end the experiment, apologizing for teasing her unnecessarily. At that precise moment, an absolutely enormous monster materializes in the armory. Keith immediately panics, shouting for Diana to stop and dismiss the creature. He explains frantically that the monster was meant as a simple experiment. She did not need to actually bring out something this massive and potentially dangerous. Diana responds with enthusiasm rather than concern. She praises his wonderful idea, noting that this approach represents exactly what anyone would expect from their demon king. The equipment he selected truly represents the only thing he needs for successful operations. Later, Alira approaches and comments on how the monocle suits him aesthetically. Keith finds himself distracted by her appearance, specifically her chest area. His thoughts turn incredulous as he discovers that this equipment can even display someone's 3 body measurements. He questions what kind of function this represents and why it exists at all. Curiosity overwhelms hesitation as he reads the displayed information. Starting from the top measurement, her bust size registers as 98 centimeters. His internal reaction focuses on how impressively large that measurement is. He reflects that Alira's robe effectively hides her figure, making accurate visual assessment difficult. The thought triggers a memory comparison. Mari also possessed quite substantial measurements in that area, despite appearing modest in standard clothing. Jinro interrupts Keith's distracted thoughts, requesting permission to suggest something. He proposes that Keith should test out his abilities through practical application. Keith agrees immediately, acknowledging this as an excellent idea. He possesses a specific goal that brought him to this current position in the first place. The entire reason he became Demon King stems from that singular objective, freeing his family, the Aldeburgh Thieves Guild, from the Kingdom of Tristram's persecution and control. Before executing any rescue operation, Keith establishes a couple of fundamental rules that everyone must follow absolutely. First, no killing people under any circumstances. Second, avoid hurting people as much as possible during all operations. These restrictions define how they will conduct themselves. Diana confirms that these parameters effectively transform their mission into a stealth-based search and extraction operation rather than a combat assault. The sound of a gunshot punctuates her observation. Victor the Gunslinger clearly stands out too much for stealth operations given his weapon preferences and combat style. His participation would compromise the entire mission. Jinro adds that he would also stick out problematically due to his distinctive appearance. His physical characteristics make blending into human populations essentially impossible. Diana offers an alternative contribution. She can provide her summons as a method of transportation for the operation. She also recommends bringing the dark mage Alira along since her versatile magical abilities can assist in handling a wide variety of unexpected situations. Alira responds with enthusiasm, promising to kill all those pioneer humans instantly once they arrive. Diana immediately corrects her sharply. She reminds Alira that Keith explicitly stated harming humans excessively is completely off limits. She demands confirmation that Alira understands this restriction clearly. Alira confirms her understanding with perfect clarity. Keith finalizes the team composition. The 2 of them will accompany him on this rescue operation. He announces that they should begin heading toward their destination immediately. Alira approaches him directly, bending close and taking his hand in hers. She insists that such conventional travel methods are completely unnecessary. Diana shouts about how insolent this behavior appears. Alira counters that her approach is absolutely necessary for what comes next. She instructs Keith to picture the location closest to where he wants to go in as much detail as possible, visualizing every aspect he can remember. Keith focuses his mind and begins reciting an incantation that flows through his consciousness. He speaks of being veiled in darkness, the never-ending flow of time, each step waiting through a falcon's fleeting daydream. Time exists as both a pathway and apart from the path. Every moment eventually returns to darkness. Nothing reflects in the dark, and no time remains to bid farewell. The words connect to the eternal expanse as gates form in the astral realm around their immediate area. Alira confirms that everything is set properly, though the portal will only remain stable for 30 seconds. They need to move immediately. She calls Diana, warning that she should enter the gate now, unless she wants to get left behind in the castle. Diana runs forward quickly, acknowledging that she understands while requesting their majesty to lead the way. Keith confirms and steps toward the shimmering portal that will transport them toward his imprisoned family. The portal deposits all three of them at their destination. Keith immediately activates his Phantom Thief skills to unlock the entry door without triggering any alarms or alerts. His mental planning assigns roles clearly. Diana will remain at this position on standby while Alira accompanies him deeper into the facility. He activates his Phantom Thief scanning ability, causing his mana to spread outward across the entire area like an invisible net gathering information. This particular skill developed after his transformation into a Phantom Thief. The effective range extends roughly 100 meters in all directions from his current position. Alira's mana signature also radiates throughout the area, as she maintains readiness for combat or support. The scanning ability reveals multiple soldiers stationed at various points throughout the building. Deep within the structure sits a large cage containing several people. His target has been located successfully. Keith examines the people trapped inside more carefully through his scanning vision. Recognition floods through him as he identifies members of his guild. He moves forward with Alira following silently behind him. They navigate through corridors until reaching a corner where obstacles present themselves. Keith notes that guards stand positioned just around this turn. Alira volunteers to handle the situation completely. Keith grants permission for her to proceed however she sees fit. Alira activates her paralysis mist ability combined with wind manipulation. The magical combination flows forward around the corner, spreading through the air where the guards breathe it unknowingly. She confirms that the path has been cleared for safe passage. All the soldiers collapse simultaneously as the paralysis takes full effect. Keith and Alira move past the fallen guards without hesitation. Keith compliments Alira's efficient work, while she steps casually on the unconscious soldiers during their passage, treating them like obstacles rather than people. They reach the cage holding the prisoners. Keith activates his unlocking skill, causing the door mechanism to release without requiring any physical key or combination. The lock simply obeys his command and opens. He enters the cage area and approaches one of the men lying on the floor. Keith gently wakes this person, while immediately instructing him to remain quiet to avoid alerting any guards who might be beyond the paralysis zone. The prisoners look at Keith with expressions of pure shock. They focus on the horns protruding from his head and the monocle covering one eye. Their confusion manifests in questions about what happened to his appearance and why he looks so different from when they last saw him. Keith deflects these concerns, promising to explain everything later after they escape this place. Right now, they need to focus on breaking out of prison. The captain among the thieves processes this information with growing understanding. He voices the painful realization that the king's promise to forgive them all was nothing, but an elaborate ruse designed to control Keith's actions. The entire agreement existed only to manipulate Keith into defeating the Demon King without any genuine intention of honoring the terms. A young girl named Luca suddenly rushes forward and grabs onto Keith, addressing him as Big Brother with obvious joy and relief. Keith notes how much her hair has grown during his absence. The length has increased significantly since he last saw her. Luca responds with happiness radiating from every word, explaining that she always maintained faith that he would eventually come to save them all. She questions whether he truly defeated the Demon King, as the stories claim, then notices the horns on his head with renewed confusion. Keith acknowledges that the situation involves a very long story that requires proper time to explain fully. First priority involves getting everyone out of this prison to safety. The captain shifts his attention to Alira, asking Keith about the identity of this beautiful woman accompanying him. Keith introduces Alira as his subordinate of sorts, keeping the explanation deliberately vague. The captain responds with approval, noting that Keith has apparently become a real man during his time away from the guild. Keith leads everyone out of the cage area. One guild member approaches an unconscious guard lying on the ground, and questions what happened to cause this condition. Keith explains that Alira's magic created this effect through her paralysis abilities. As they prepare to leave, Alira draws her weapon and announces that the time has arrived to open another gate for their escape. Keith immediately stops her from executing that plan. He points out critical flaws. Her gate magic brings forth wind and lightning as side effects during creation. Using such volatile magic in a confined underground space presents extreme danger to everyone present. Additionally, the visual spectacle will draw unwanted attention from any guards not already incapacitated. They need stealth, not flashy magical displays. She raises his hand and activates his Phantom Thief scanning ability again, searching for alternative escape routes. The scan reveals a back exit that leads directly outside the prison structure. 4 guards remain stationed near this exit in close proximity. Keith questions whether Diana can summon a creature capable of carrying all the escaped prisoners simultaneously. Diana confirms she possesses no problem handling even 10 times this number of people through her summoning capabilities. However, the beast she has in mind for this transportation task is extremely large physically. She would prefer moving everyone outside the building first before conducting the summoning to avoid structural damage or detection. Keith agrees with this tactical assessment and orders everyone to follow his lead toward the mine. Back exit. They navigate through the prison successfully and emerge into open air. The captain breathes deeply, commenting on how this represents their first breath of fresh air in quite a while. The entire group expresses happiness at their liberation, jumping and celebrating with obvious joy after enduring prolonged captivity. Keith observes how thin everyone has become during imprisonment. The captain explains their meal situation matter-of-factly. Twice daily they received broth and half a loaf of hard bread. Eating only that amount for an extended period naturally results in severe weight loss and physical deterioration. Keith turns to Diana with new instructions. If anything goes wrong during the next phase, she needs to take everyone and escape immediately without hesitation. Diana objects to this plan, questioning what will happen to Keith if they abandon him. Keith reveals that he still has unfinished business remaining inside the castle. Personal matters require his attention before he can consider this mission complete. He stares down the long, dim hallway, his expression unreadable as he checks the hidden daggers at his belt. He returns inside the prison facility alone, passing among the unconscious soldiers Alira paralyzed earlier. Their heavy breathing is the only sound in the damp stone corridor. Voices drift from behind a partially closed door. The king speaks with his subordinate about matters they assume remain private. The king expresses frank disgust at the idea of a thief being included in the company of heroes. He scoffs at the necessity of such an alliance, his tone dripping with arrogance. However, he acknowledges that custom dictates the oracle's revelation, decides who qualifies as hero and who serves as companions. The words lack any genuine respect or appreciation. Keith remembers the king's earlier promise with perfect clarity. The monarch had pledged that upon safe return to the kingdom after defeating the Demon King, Keith would receive his freedom along with the complete release of his thieves' guild. The king gave his word as a binding oath, witnessed by the highest officials of the court. Yet, as the conversation continues, it becomes clear that the king never intended to honor that debt. He speaks of cleaning up the loose ends once the threat is gone, implying a much darker fate for Keith's people. Keith activates his enhanced hearing skill to capture the conversation more clearly through the door, his jaw tightening as the true depth of the betrayal becomes undeniable. The king continues speaking with obvious contempt about finally getting rid of that troublesome thief. He characterizes Keith as a bastard whose presence in the hero's company disgusted him from the beginning. The thought alone makes his skin crawl with revulsion. The subordinate voices complete agreement with His Majesty's assessment of the situation. Heavy footsteps approach from the corridor. Our main character enters the room, greeting the king and general formally. The king and his subordinate immediately shout for guards to respond to this intrusion. Keith activates his transformation ability, shifting his appearance to match a standard guard uniform and features. He responds to their calls by appearing in guard form, questioning whether they mean this particular guard. Then he shifts again into a different guard's appearance, offering the alternative that perhaps they wanted this other guard instead. The casual display of impossible transformation happens right before their eyes. Both the king and general panic at witnessing such unnatural ability. The general rushes forward to attack, screaming about a monster infiltrating the castle. Keith activates his Phantom Thief swift movement skill while thinking through the tactical situation. Only the Phantom Thief job classification grants access to the disguise skill. Without appropriate job knowledge to understand what they witness, people naturally perceive him as some kind of monster rather than recognizing the specific ability being employed. Keith compliments the general's swing technique while dodging effortlessly. He casually mentions that he will be taking the sword as payment for the demonstration. The general rushes toward him again with renewed aggression. Keith activates his locking skill and seals the door mechanism behind him. The door becomes impossible to open from either side without his permission. The general pounds against the sealed door from outside, cursing his inability to break through or follow. Keith now stands alone with the king, who demands to know his identity and intentions. Keith considers how to introduce himself properly. He settles on identifying himself as the Phantom Thief Demon King Keith, then questions whether adding revenge motivation would sound too cliché given the circumstances. The king reacts with shock at hearing the name Keith. Recognition and disbelief war in his expression as he questions whether this horned figure truly represents the same thief from the hero party. Keith responds with mock gratitude that the king remembers him so clearly. He activates his appraising eye and scans the king thoroughly. The results display that the monarch possesses the reign and strategy skills at high levels. The general outside possesses command and tactic skills of comparable quality. Keith notes mentally that they both have various other useful abilities in their repertoire. As far as statistical measurements go, their knowledge bases prove quite impressive and valuable. The king demands to know what Keith is muttering about. Keith responds with cold clarity. These represent things he intends to steal from the king tonight. The skills, the knowledge, the abilities, all of it will become Keith's property through his phantom thief powers. Leaving the king as nothing more than an empty shell, stripped of everything that made him effective as a ruler, Keith emerges from the castle and rejoins the waiting group outside. He apologizes to Diana for keeping everyone waiting during his extended absence. Diana dismisses the concern entirely, asking instead how his exploration of the castle interior proceeded. Keith describes the experience as quite enjoyable, noting that he discovered several useful items during his investigation. The captain and Alira have already mounted themselves on summoned wolves for transportation. The captain observes the castle growing noisier behind them, suggesting their escape has been discovered. Diana questions which mount Keith prefers to ride for their departure. She explains that the duty of the four heavenly kings involves serving and protecting the demon lord at all times, so riding with her makes the most logical sense. She summons a giant beast far larger than the wolves provided to others. Alira immediately protests that this arrangement seems unfair in Diana's favor. Diana responds dismissively that the wolf she lent to Alira is comparatively very small. The demon lord must ride the Fenrir she has summoned. She encourages Keith to mount without hesitation, since she will not hold back in providing the best transportation available. Keith accepts her invitation and climbs onto the massive creature with her. The thick fur of the Fenrir feels soft and surprisingly warm beneath his hands. Diana's face flushes noticeably at the close physical proximity, her breath hitching as he settles into place behind her. Keith notices her reaction and questions whether something hurts or causes discomfort, concerned that his armor might be digging into her back. Diana denies any pain, insisting everything feels perfectly fine, though she refuses to meet his gaze. Keith instructs her to hold onto his waist for stability during the ride, his voice steady despite the awkwardness of the moment. Alira watches this interaction unfold with growing jealousy clearly written across her sharp features, her eyes narrowing as she adjusts her own gear. Diana provides additional instructions, telling Keith to press his body firmly against hers and hold on tight to maintain proper stability during high-speed travel, as the winds at that velocity can be unforgiving. Keith follows these directions nervously, questioning whether his positioning feels acceptable and if he is crowding her too much. Diana confirms that everything sits perfectly aligned, her heart racing as she grips the Fenrir's mane. The Fenrir launches into motion with a powerful surge, carrying them away from the castle at tremendous speed that leaves the world a blur of green and gray. Everyone departs together as a unified group, the rhythmic thud of paws echoing against the mountain pass. Diana comments on how the view from this elevated field position provides excellent visibility in all directions, allowing them to spot any pursuit from miles away. Nobody will be able to follow them successfully given the distance they have already covered in such a short window of time. She suggests that talking more tomorrow makes better sense, but camping here tonight represents a good strategic decision to preserve their strength. Keith reflects that camping feels nostalgic after spending so much time in different circumstances, reminding him of the long nights spent on the road with his former party. 1. Guild member volunteers to get a fire started for the group, already looking for dry kindling among the rocks. Diana interrupts, explaining that servants will handle such tasks automatically as part of the summoning's utility. Confusion meets this statement since nobody understands what servants she references in the middle of the wilderness. Diana raises her hand immediately and summons a tent through her ancient magic, the air shimmering with golden particles. A massive house-like structure materializes before their eyes rather than any simple camping tent, complete with ornate carvings and sturdy pillars. Everyone reacts with shock at the scale of what has appeared, their jaws dropping at the sudden luxury appearing in the dirt. Multiple people express amazement at the impressive construction, stepping forward to touch the shimmering fabric. Keith thinks internally that calling this structure a tent feels misleading. It resembles a villa more than camping equipment, and it probably has more rooms than the local inn. Diana apologizes for the modest accommodation, requesting forgiveness for offering only her best available option, which she considers quite humble. Keith's thoughts acknowledge that the four heavenly kings truly operate on a completely different level than ordinary people, possessing wealth and power that defy common logic. Luca approaches Keith with obvious excitement, commenting on how amazing Diana is and how she wants to learn such magic. Keith comes close to Diana and instructs his younger sister to show proper respect to their host. He points out that this lady may appear short physically, but her age exceeds Luca's by a substantial margin, carrying centuries of wisdom. Luca smiles brightly and questions whether she can address Diana as big sister. Diana responds warmly that since Luca belongs to the Demon Lord's family, she can use whatever form of address feels comfortable, her earlier flustered expression softening into a genuine motherly smile. Later, the captain sits across from Keith while they share tea together. The captain addresses Keith by his new title of Demon Lord, observing that Keith has genuinely become something important and powerful. Keith acknowledges this observation while admitting he still cannot quite believe the transformation himself. At another table, two guild members sit together. One comments to the other, named Vigation, that he might finally obtain a girlfriend now that freedom has been achieved. Vigation thanks his companion for the encouragement. Keith approaches and questions whether Vigation feels unwell. Vigation dismisses the concern, attributing his discomfort to minor stomach pain, while insisting nobody should treat him like he is seriously sick. He laughs off the worry. Keith activates his appraising eye skill and examines Vigation's status information. The scan reveals that Vigation's stamina and strength measurements sit drastically lower than everyone else in the group. At the bottom of his status display, additional concerning information appears. Keith realizes this is not simply fatigue. Something more serious affects Vigation's health. The man holds his stomach area while Keith identifies the problem location as slightly right of the solar plexus. Keith activates his Phantom Thief skill and targets that specific part of Vigation's anatomy. The other guild member questions what Keith is doing with such focused attention. Keith deflects the question, asking instead how the pain feels now. Vigation responds with surprise that the pain has completely disappeared. He demands to know what Keith did to achieve this result. Keith explains that his eyes possess the ability to identify sickness and ailments. When he became the Demon Lord, he simultaneously gained access to Phantom Thief abilities. The captain processes this information, noting that he used to tell Keith stories about legendary thieves during his childhood, but never imagined Keith would actually achieve such status. Keith immediately activates his disguise skill and vanishes from his current position, reappearing elsewhere. People react with shock at witnessing this impossible movement. Luca becomes extremely excited, noting that she has never heard of such abilities existing before. Keith confirms that this demonstrates how his powers function now. Everyone looks at him with amazement and disbelief. Multiple people comment that Keith has become the real deal, a genuine phantom thief who exists only in dreams and legends. They begin calling his name with happiness and celebration. A subordinate arrives and announces to Keith that dinner has been prepared. Delicious food gets served to the entire group. Luca eats enthusiastically, commenting on how delicious everything tastes. She questions whether one dish is slightly raw. Diana explains that the meal is called roast beef and is meant to be served at that particular temperature and texture. Alira eats with unstoppable energy, consuming food enthusiastically. She offers portions to others sitting nearby, encouraging them to eat more meat without restraint. One guild member protests that eating such quantities will cause his throat to tear from the volume. Alira responds with disturbing enthusiasm that she loves watching when a human stomach tears from overconsumption. The other guild members characterize this as an absolutely crazy thing to mention. Everyone begins laughing despite the dark humor. The captain holds a glass of mead and comments on its fine quality, swirling the golden liquid and admiring its clarity. However, no matter how much he drinks, he cannot seem to get drunk despite his best efforts. His body seems to burn through the alcohol faster than he can pour it. Diana approaches him and begins laughing at his frustration. Everyone gathers around them as the two engage in a drinking competition, the atmosphere growing loud and rowdy. The crowd cheers enthusiastically for both participants, banging their mugs on the heavy wooden tables in a steady, rhythmic beat. Eventually, Diana collapses with her head resting on the table, a faint smile still on her face. She has drunk herself into complete unconsciousness, defeated by the sheer volume of the tavern's strongest brew. Keith questions whether she feels okay, leaning over to check her pulse. The captain has also been carried away by other guild members who needed to remove him from the competition area before he could start a second round. Keith lifts Diana carefully, commenting that she needs to be carried like a princess given her current state, though his own legs feel slightly heavy from the festivities. The captain protests weakly from across the room that Keith should rest a bit longer before exerting himself. Keith responds that good alcohol wears off quickly with just a short nap for recovery, and his constitution has always been stronger than most. One guild member approaches Keith with a serious expression, noting that Keith no longer fits properly as a part of the Thieves' Guild anymore. The surrounding chatter dies down as the weight of the statement settles over the group. Keith reacts with confusion at this sudden declaration, his brow furrowed as he shifts Diana's weight. The man clarifies immediately not to misunderstand his meaning, reaching out to pat Keith's shoulder. He is not suggesting they cease being family regardless of changing circumstances. Their bond is forged in years of shared shadows and narrow escapes. They will always remain family until the very end, no matter what titles are added to their names. However, Keith now functions as both a thief and a demon lord simultaneously, balancing two worlds that rarely meet. He leads incredibly powerful individuals like the Four Heavenly Kings, commanding legions that the guild could never imagine. Keith has outgrown the Aldeburgh Thieves Guild in terms of scale and capability, stepping into a destiny that stretches far beyond their small corner of the world. The guild member proposes forming an alliance instead of maintaining the old hierarchical structure. He can see clearly that Keith will accomplish something significant in the future. When that moment arrives, the Thieves Guild will be positioned to provide support. They might not know exactly how far their assistance can extend, but family bonds create opportunities for meaningful contribution. Keith became the Demon Lord and now commands the Four Heavenly Kings. As a phantom thief, he possesses the ability to steal anything regardless of protection or security. The guild cannot remain the same simple thieves they once were given these developments. Even so, maintaining connection as family holds paramount importance. Forming an alliance represents the best path forward, given their diverging capabilities. Keith looks down while processing this proposal. The captain responds with encouragement not to wear such a gloomy expression during what should be a celebration. He raises his glass and toasts to the phantom thief demon lord Keith. Keith accepts the toast and offers his own to the Aldeburgh Thieves Guild captain in return. Later, Keith rides the Fenrir while contemplating their next destination. He notes that everyone from the guild must feel exhausted after their ordeal and extended celebration. Returning to the Demon Lord's castle first makes the most sense strategically. Diana suggests an alternative. They could stay in this area and continue touring nearby locations. She mentions the territories where demi-humans live, including elves, dwarfs, goblins, kobolds, and other non-human intelligent species. The living areas for the Demon King's subordinates exist close to the Demon King's castle geographically. Keith expresses interest in this proposal. Diana identifies the nearest location as the Elf Village. They redirect their travel toward that destination. Upon arriving in the area, Keith dismounts and observes elves moving through their settlement. He watches their distinctive features and movements carefully, questioning whether these truly represent the elves from legends and stories.
Here I am, know it's been a while.